Georgia's season is over, but there's still one more game left in the college football season. Of course, it's the national championship game Monday night, Michigan versus Washington. And if you're a Georgia fan out there, probably watching this video right now, this is a tough pill to swallow, because if you watch those last two playoff games, of course, like I did, of course it's going through your mind again. Man, Georgia really got left out of the playoff. The committee got it wrong, right? I know it, you know it. I think the committee knows it now, and so does Champ Bailey. He was asked about it, I guess, a few days ago. This is what he had to say, and of course, he's going to sound like a lot of Georgia fans who watch them dominate week after week after week during the regular season. Here's what he said. He said, "We should have been in the playoff." When they started debating about how they were constructing the playoff, they said they wanted the best teams. Are you going to say Washington is better than us? Texas? I know Alabama beat us, so I'll give them that. Michigan's undefeated in the Big Ten. I'll give you that. But we're definitely one of the top 4 teams. There's no doubt about that. And listen, I don't want to continue beating this dead horse. I really don't, right? It happened. Georgia lost to Alabama. They're not one of the 4 most deserving teams. But it's clear now they are the best, one of the 4 best in college football. They were one of the top 4 teams, and the committee got it wrong, right? If you're doing the 4 most deserving, then you'd have to put Florida State in, even with their backup quarterback in, right? If it's the top 4 teams, Georgia's got to be in. Georgia has to be in there. Now, I know what you're saying. Well, who comes out, right? Well, Texas's loss to Oklahoma was worse than Georgia's 3-point loss to Alabama. And I get it. I know if you put Alabama in, you have to put Texas in. I totally get that. Texas beat Alabama in Tuscaloosa. They have to be in if you put Alabama in. Washington went undefeated in the Pac-12, beat Oregon twice. They deserve to be in. Michigan, while they were cheating the whole time, they were undefeated, beat Ohio State, beat a terrible Iowa team in their conference championship. They had to be in. But if we're talking about the 4 best teams, Georgia's better than Texas, I think, who was obviously beatable. I think they could absolutely beat Alabama in a rematch, but they didn't, right? And again, I don't want to continue talking about this, but I'm going to when a guy like Champ Bailey, who knows ball, comes out and says the exact same thing. Georgia's one of the best 4 teams in the country. If you don't believe it, you need to watch more ball. You're clueless if you think there are 4 better teams than the University of Georgia. I'm not saying they were the most deserving, because they lost their first playoff game, which it was. The Georgia and Alabama was a playoff game that only Washington and Oregon had, right? They had a playoff game too. Washington won. They were in. Alabama beat Georgia. They were in. Alabama deserved to be in. They won the game that matters. Georgia did not execute, and they dropped the only game they could not drop. But at the end of the day, I think after watching those 2 playoff games, I'm sitting here thinking like all of you, Georgia's clearly one of the 4 best teams. Alabama looked really bad and still almost won that game. Michigan didn't look all that great to me. They barely beat an Alabama team that was snapping the ball left and right. They were not executing. They were still leaving guys wide open defensively. Alabama brought their A game and maybe had, some calls go their way. The officials may have had an Alabama sweatshirt under the uniform they had to wear. But, I'm kidding, but I'm also not. Alabama gives Georgia their best, and they went on. But again, I don't want to talk about this too much. And once Monday happens and we have, found out who won that game, then I'm going to stop talking about it, because at some point you have to move on to the 2024 season. I get it. But man, it does feel like Georgia really let one get away, especially, losing to Alabama, but with the committee saying, nope, Georgia doesn't get in. You've been number 1 all season long. You throttled a top 10 Ole Miss team. You crushed a top 25 Kentucky team. You went on the road and just smashed Tennessee by double digits. Wasn't even close. You came from behind against Auburn. They did everything they needed to do, except they had to play Alabama and Atlanta. And Alabama and Atlanta seems to be a better team than Alabama and Tuscaloosa. As we've seen over the last few years, I think they've never lost there, right? I mean, it is what it is. But it's still crazy to me how you have the number 1 team in the country lose by 3 points in a conference championship game, and you drop them to 6. It's crazy. The fact that they dropped them to 6 and put Florida State at 5 just shows you the committee really didn't have a clue of what they were talking about. They did not put the most 4 deserving teams in, and they didn't put the 4 best teams in. The committee gets an F, and I think, those committee members right now are sitting there thinking, yeah, maybe we dropped the ball here. Georgia could beat Texas. They could beat Washington. They could beat Michigan. And they could beat Alabama in a rematch. They could. But they'd have to go out and execute a lot better than they did in Atlanta against Alabama. But I think, Vegas would agree if Georgia played Washington, Georgia would be favored. If Georgia played Michigan, Georgia would be favored. Georgia's probably favored against every team. Now, Vegas isn't completely right all the time, right? In fact, I beat Vegas in my picks over on Dawgs for bowl season. If I had money on those games, I'm taking Vegas's money. So they're not always 100%. You can't look at Vegas every single time. But Texas wants no part of Georgia. All those teams that made it in the playoff, when that SEC championship was being played out and Alabama was completing their win over Georgia, they're all happy. Michigan was happy. They didn't want an undefeated Georgia in the playoff. Washington, they're thinking, oh, Georgia's out. Georgia's out. We beat Oregon. We're in. Alabama beat Georgia. Georgia's out. This is great news. Texas is the same way. Texas didn't want a rematch with Alabama, but they probably would have taken that before they played the Dawgs. So there's not a team out there that wants Georgia. If this were an expanded playoff, they would all be, I don't want to say shaking in their boots to play that, but they wouldn't want to. They'd rather play any other team than Georgia. I truly believe that. They are a complete team that just did not get it done. And there are consequences to losing games. The wrong game. Georgia lost the wrong game. They're done. But when you have guys like Champ Bailey come out and say this, and I bet if you ask David Pollock and a few other guys, especially, they're close to the Georgia program. So, of course, they're a little biased, right? But he's not wrong. In fact, he's 100%. You can't tell me Washington is better than Georgia. Could they beat Georgia? Yeah, if you played 5 times on a neutral field, maybe they beat Georgia once or twice. I like the Huskies. They deserve to be there. They've got an elite quarterback. They played or have played their best on the biggest stage this year, and you have to give them a ton of credit. And I think they could beat Michigan 100% in the championship game. Michigan you talk about a weak schedule. Everyone was talking about Georgia's weak schedule heading into the season. Looking back on it, they've got several quality wins. Michigan beat Ohio State. That was it. And then they end up beating Alabama. An Alabama team that, let's be honest, they did not play well at all. And a lot of that is not Michigan just throttling them. No, Alabama played bad. They did not execute. And a lot of that had nothing to do with what Michigan was doing. Michigan didn't look like this great, fantastic team. And I think whoever wins that national championship, we're going to be thinking, this was the year they needed to do it. This is the year where an elite, tremendous football team did not win the national championship. If we're going down the list of best national championship teams, whoever wins this 2023 championship is going to be towards the bottom of that as far as great teams that won a title. It's not, no one's going to look at this Michigan team or Washington team and be like, oh, wow, remember that team? They were really great. No, they weren't. That's just being honest. But it makes this football season great. This has been one of the best seasons because it's been so unpredictable. There's a reason most people thought Georgia was going to beat Alabama. It's because they still might be a better team. They weren't better on Saturday, and, that's on Georgia. They knew the stakes, and they came out and played their worst game of the season on the biggest stage. That's got to be fixed, right? And they need to understand that, and I think everyone else is too. They lost the wrong game. It's done. It's over. There's no three-peat. But you could still look at this, and I think a lot of Georgia fans are thinking, man, Georgia could beat this team. Georgia could beat Washington. Georgia could have beaten Texas and Michigan. And if they had one more shot at Alabama, they could have won. I'm not saying they were going to, because Alabama still has this little voodoo magic over Georgia, especially in Atlanta. But it does feel like Georgia dropped the ball and blew a golden opportunity to win 3 consecutive national titles. They had the opportunity. They dropped the ball, literally, against Alabama. But, and again, I'm not going to talk about this much more, but the season is still, the season is not over yet. So we can continue talking about it. After Monday, we have a national championship. Probably not going to talk about this anymore because the horse is dead. And I'm giving it one last push, right? One more punch. But after this, it's time for everyone to move on. But I think it is going to be really tough for Georgia fans to watch that national championship game knowing these teams don't really look all that great. And if Georgia would have done what they were supposed to and played well and beaten Alabama like everyone thought, they would be in a prime position to have won the national title this year. They didn't. they came up short with the season on the line. And, there are consequences to that. And Georgia's consequences is that they got left out of the playoff, even though they are clearly one of the 4 best teams in the country. And I think everyone knows that. Now, thanks for watching this video. Really appreciate it. Sign up to our free newsletter. That link is down below. Hope to see you on the website.